All right. Hello, everybody. So, this is kind of the second part of our week three or session three sort of video lecture because I wasn't available on Friday to meet. And two things that came up during that last meeting were recommendations on time management, which I covered in the previous video, and recommendations on sort of being in front of people, which will be this video. Now, I've been doing this for 9 or 10 years now, and I'm still not incredibly comfortable being up in front of people. It's not my favorite thing to do. There are some things that I think make it a little bit easier, and that's what we'll go into today. So similar to the previous video, I'm going to share a couple resources with you, which I'll kind of talk through, and then I'll link these so that you can look over them on your own. So I'm not going to go through each of these, but I will highlight a couple that I think are kind of important or helpful. So the first one, sort of nervousness is normal, practice and prepare. I think that we overlook this sort of nervousness as normal, particularly when we see a speaker who looks incredibly confident. And some of them are incredibly confident. Some people are very much at home speaking in front of crowds. But I think that some degree of nervousness is normal because it means that we care. And I think acknowledging that can help. I think this sort of second part, this preparation part, is helpful too. Having a script, being comfortable with the material can be helpful. Personally, even when I make these videos, I don't necessarily have a script that I'm going to read from for various reasons. One being that it always feels like that person's reading from a script. But the other is that sometimes in the moment I decide that I want to change something, or I realize something that I didn't when I wrote something. But practicing helps. And even things like this, I've found that doing these video recordings is incredibly helpful. I'm not speaking to a bunch of people, but I'm using many of the same skills, right? Intonation, organization of ideas, hand gestures, pauses. All of these things are things that we use when we're presenting in front of a live audience, and doing it in front of a camera or recording allows us to practice. It also, I think, allows us to go back and rewatch these things, which can be frustrating and painful, especially if you're, a person who doesn't like the sound of your own voice. But I find often when I do these, or when I sometimes video record myself in a classroom setting for students that are not present, what I find is something that I thought was not that good, it was actually much better than I thought. I guess it's sort of like your own worst critic. Now, that might go the other way for some people, depending. Organizing and watching for feedback. So one thing that I notice about kind of feedback, I mean, again, we can be our own harshest critic. And some of us, myself included, are trying to read a room in real time and are sort of hyper vigilant to facial expressions, body language, things like that. And we're trying to adjust. And that can be a good thing, but it also can be a negative thing if we misread somebody's facial expression, right? So I find that some people are just generally impassive while they're listening to a speech or a presentation. And so to look like they're disinterested, but it's a sort of false message, right, that we're getting. So I would say don't get too fixated on that. What is helpful is to ask for feedback from people afterwards. So if you give a presentation in front of a class, and it's not part of the curriculum to already do so, I would ask your instructor, how did I really do? I felt really nervous. What could I do to improve? And just take that as constructive criticism. Number 5 and 6 are ones that I use as a sort of mechanism to make my life easier. So I think that when we get up in front of a group of people, if we are nervous or anxious, it can be really helpful to just admit that out loud to the audience. I'm really nervous right now. What you'll find is that a lot of people will laugh because they can sympathize or empathize with that thought process of being up in front of a bunch of people. And I also feel like it kind of begins to diffuse things, and people will be a little bit more sympathetic to you, or at least maybe engage in a visual way with facial expressions or body language. I also really like humor and telling stories. Those of you that have taken in-person classes with me before know that I do this. I'm one of those people who sometimes my mechanism when I'm uncomfortable is to make a joke. And so having that humor in there, lightening people up, seeing people laugh when you're speaking, especially if it's unintentional, like you wanted them to laugh, can be really helpful. So humor, I use memes a lot in my visual language, and visual presentations. And then I do like anecdotes. I feel that people gravitate to anecdotes. I think that they also humanize us as speakers, and they're more organic, right? We do this in our regular conversations. And then I think the visual aids ones, so number 10 and number 7 are ones that I think are helpful. If you have the luxury to use a slideshow of some sort, whether that's a PowerPoint or Google Slides, I think it's helpful to even call that attention away from yourself. So it's a little bit of like sleight of hand magicianship, but it will redirect the audience's attention. And now people aren't just looking at you, which can be nerve-wracking. They're looking at something else, and you can also turn and look at that, which also kind of makes things, I think, a little bit more comfortable. Now, number 7 here is not reading from an outline, or sorry, not reading from a script, but reading from kind of an outline. And the way that I do that is, typically I have a slideshow presentation, and I have the slideshow that I put up on a big screen, and then I have an iPad nearby with the same presentation so that I can see where I'm at. Now, I think if you are giving a speech and you're reading from a script, it definitely feels like we're reading from a script unless you're an actor. But I think that just practicing it, working from that outline, ad-libbing a little bit can be incredibly helpful. So that's one. So these are from the Harvard Professional Development Center. I'm going to try and switch screens. Last time I did this, I accidentally ended the video. So I'm going to switch to this one. Let's make sure that I need to stop sharing Harvard. Okay. So this one, what's interesting, much like the study skills video, is that when you start looking around, you kind of start to hear the same things over and over again, or very, very similar advice. And I think that is kind of a good thing. It means that there are certain things that seem to work well, but it can also be a little bit frustrating if you keep reading the same thing everywhere and it doesn't really work for you. Couple things, and again, I would defer back to Cal Newport, CalNewport, his blog. His sort of rise to fame came with a book called How to Be a Straight A Student, where he went out and interviewed top performing students at Ivy League colleges and asked what they were doing differently than other students. And it came down to things like time management, structure, organization, things that we talked about in the time management video. I say this because I think when we're looking for advice on these things, the best places to go are to people who are doing it, not to people who are talking about it from a theoretical standpoint. So with public speaking, somebody that goes out and does a lot of public speaking might be a good source for advice. But if they're a professional, if that's what they do, if that's their part of their job, they may not be the best person to ask because they've already sort of developed a pattern. But asking peers, asking other people what they've done, especially if you're taking like a communications class or you have a class where you're delivering a speech, if somebody gives a really awesome speech, it might be worth just asking them how they prepared. So again, similar things here, right? So preparation is key. Couple ways you can do that. Again, doing a video recording like this can be really helpful. Doing an audio recording of yourself, even if you don't listen to it again, talking through it, it's the same thing as a sort of old-fashioned thing of practicing in front of a mirror. Some of this is about comfort, right? Like visiting the room where you will be speaking. Again, keeping in mind strengths and weaknesses. Have a funny tip, right? So again, kind of funniness, right? Things like that. Humor, again, you can read this at your leisure, but this is a lot of the sort of same idea. The other thing, sort of last recommendation, and I think bringing your personality into it, which is one of the things mentioned in the Harvard reading, bringing your personality into it can be key, and it can be really engaging. If you're preparing for a speech, or maybe you just want to get a little bit better at speaking in front of people, there are a couple of things that I think are helpful. Finding smaller groups to speak in front of can be helpful, or I just lost my train of thought. Practicing, right? So there you go. Like sometimes in real time, like you blank on your process, right, where you wanted to say, and again, also normal, and you can recover from that. But I think what I was going to say is, like, personality wise, bringing your personality into it, not being stilted, not reading from a script, can help. And one of the ways that I think you can develop it, this is what I was going to say, is to go watch some TED Talks, or go listen to the Moth Radio Hour. Listen to people who are delivering some sort of speech in front of an audience, a live audience in particular, and see what they do. And think about which ones are appealing to you. I know that this doesn't really help with like the nervousness part directly, but I think it will if you are authentic, if you're your own, individual person, knowing that, the anxiousness will never completely go away. And yes, there are, physical ways to sort of deal with this by stretching, or doing circular breathing, where you breathe in for a count of 3, hold for a count of 3, exhale for a count of 3, hold for a count of 3, and repeat a couple of times. That help regulate your breathing and your heart rate. So there are ways to do this. I know that for a while, people talked about the sort of power pose, like sort of doing the Superman hands on hips sort of wide stance, was theoretically supposed to help. I think the newer research says that actually has very limited application. So just know kind of yourself, and try and kind of prepare for it psychologically as best you can. And then know that kind of in the moment, leveraging your personality and humor, and being confident about your subject matter is going to go a long ways towards making it a little bit easier, even if it's never completely like smooth sailing for you. So there you go. If you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you all later.